Colored pencils can be challenging to master. Even though you start off feeling like your drawings are going to be higher quality this time, you've got better quality pencils and paper and learned a trick or two, and you're still struggling to get those colored pencils figured out. So in this video, I'm going to reveal some critical mistakes to drawing with colored pencils and how you can change them. Layering colored pencils also depends on picking the proper colors, because in order to layer properly, you actually do need to know a little bit about what colors are going to work and which ones aren't, so that you don't end up making more mistakes for yourself. Now, I know that picking colors is actually something that a lot of you struggle with. Making the mistake of picking the wrong color for your drawing won't horribly impact the results. What you don't want to do is pick a color and end up adding way too much of it. Just because you assume it's the right color doesn't always mean it's going to be the right color, especially once you already have other colors down, because depending on how much yellow, red, or blue are in those other colors that you already have down, when you add another color on top, it's also got yellow, red, or blue in it, and it's going to impact the colors underneath and mix and make a different color than what you were probably thinking it would. A good example of this is actually when you're trying to mix orange colors, or when you're trying to mix some yellows and maybe some reds and ultimately end up with an orange in between. The thing is, when you are choosing those orange colors, the ranges of oranges have either more yellow or more red in them, and depending on which ones you choose, it will drastically change the results of the color that you end up getting. So if you choose the wrong color of those, you're either going to end up having too much yellow or you're going to have too much red. Or say you're working with greens and you choose a green that you think is the right type of value and somewhat of the same color, right? Then you add it to your drawing and you realize it's got too much blue. So the key is to make sure when you are adding your layers, you add them in small increments. Now, I know I'm not like every other artist out there. I have my own style and my own way of doing things. However, if you are familiar with my tutorials, especially on Patreon, or maybe even some of the shorter ones here on YouTube, you may notice that I tend to do a lot of really small incremental layers. And then I blend each of them almost separately. Sometimes I do thicker layers than others, but majority of the time I do, especially when I'm trying to experiment to see if colors are going to work. I'm going to do very minimal layers, 1 or 2 light layers, just to see if that color is going to work, and if it's not, then I'll immediately change the next color that I choose. When you add in light increments, it allows you to see kind of how that color is going to behave with what you already have down. That way, if it's the wrong color, you haven't added too much of it. There's only just a little bit, and you can already see that it's not going to be the right color. So then you can pick the color that you actually need and be able to add more of it to counteract the color that you already have that is wrong. By adding too much of the wrong color, you're gonna make things really hard on yourself trying to correct that mistake. Here's an example. On the bottom here is a little swatch where I have a gradient of just 2 different colors. On the second swatch, I add in the wrong orange color. This color is way too light compared to the orange that needs to be used. Now, in adding this to this swatch, I'm doing a super light layer of it, so I'm not adding a big heavy layer. Now I'm doing what somebody might do because they realize that they kind of chose the wrong color there, so they're going to add in some red just to see if that's going to help try and make the color right. Then I'm going to blend that. And then on this third swatch here, I'm going to use that same wrong color, but this time I'm going to add a lot of it. And now this person may have realized their mistake and they grabbed the right color that they need, and they're adding it over the top of where they put all of that wrong color at. Now I'm going to blend this out as well, and this is the results once everything is almost dried out. There's still a couple of wet spots. You can see that the third swatch where I added too much of the wrong color, and then I ultimately added the right color over the top of that. Even though I added a lot of the right color over the top of that, the whole thing kind of blended and muddied out. It didn't end up with the same nice color gradient or even the right color. It's still not the right color. And even if I added the right color over the top of that, it's still not going to have quite the same look to it. It's always going to be off compared to what the original one was. Now, the one in the middle where I added too little, you can definitely see where that's not the right color and it definitely was too light. So you can see how much easier it would be to correct a mistake like that, where instead of adding a bunch of that wrong color to begin with, you add in slow increments so that if you do the wrong color, you can easily counteract the effect by adding a lot more of the appropriate color over the top of that. And it's going to end up with good results too because it's not over flooded with the wrong color. I actually did this on a drawing once. It was orange color, by the way, where I was drawing a horse and I chose the wrong color of orange and I added way too much of it because I was in a rush and not thinking. I should have slowed myself down and just thought, what if this is the wrong color? Instead, I didn't think about it. And what I ultimately had to do, because I ended up adding way too much and it was on a horse's back, I had to erase as much as I could and then add the right color after that. The way that you choose to blend your colored pencils actually makes a big difference in how you are able to draw. I think the most common way to blend colored pencils is to burnish blend. Now, to burnish blend, you keep adding layers and layers and layers, overlapping them over each other, and oftentimes using a lighter color over the top of the darker ones to try and blend and soften them together. And the way of getting them to blend together nicely is to make sure that you're adding a lot of pressure with your pencil while doing it. It really can take quite a number of layers to build up to get it to have a nice, smooth finish to it. Guaranteed though, you're gonna have better results if you're using wax-based colored pencils. I'm using oil-based and it's not going so well for me. I certainly hope that a lot of you have learned about using solvent to blend with. If you haven't, well, this is going to be news to you, but it is the ultimate way to blend your colored pencils. It is so much easier to do than burnish blending, and not to mention faster too, and it's not gonna make your hand hurt. All it takes is you get all of your layers down and then you take your brush with odorless mineral spirits on it, wipe off the excess, and then literally just spin that brush around over the top of it and they blend together. Now, all you have to do though is just wait about 10 to 15 minutes for your paper to dry and then you can add more layers over the top. And oftentimes by adding in the second layer and then blending that, you'll end up with rich, vibrant colors. And the other great thing about blending with solvent too is that once you have at least a couple, even I would say one layer, but once you have a couple layers built up, all the layers you add over the top of that, if you try doing a little bit of burnish blending, you're gonna have crazy awesome results. Whereas if you're trying to do that with fewer layers blended with solvent, you're gonna end up with that grainy look that you see on this sheet here. Now, when you're blending with solvent, you can either blend heavy layers or you can actually blend light layers too. On this other side, I have light layers of colored pencil that I blended together. And you can see even though it was really light layers, they actually did blend really nicely. You don't have to have a crazy amount of layers to blend your pencils. You can blend your pencils by just having a couple of layers. I do this all the time. Why do I do it? Because there's a lot of subjects that I draw that don't have a lot of layers. Say it's a wolf with light colored fur. I'm only going to be doing really minimal light layers of maybe some cold gray 2 or a warm gray 2. And those are already so close to being white anyways, but the thing is they have a grainy colored pencil look to them if they're not blended. So I always take my brush with odorless mineral spirits and soften those out to get rid of that grainy look. Whenever you blend with solvent, the paintbrush actually picks up a little bit of the color with it. This, of course, kind of leaves the colors on the paper a little bit duller, and it also adds pigments to the brush that you need to make sure you need to clean off. That is a mistake that you definitely don't want to make on any of your drawings, is you blend something dark and don't clean your brush off after. So then when you go to use it again later and you're blending something maybe white, you're gonna end up coloring your white area whatever color you had on that brush last. Another thing is that when you are blending dark colors, particularly like walnut brown or black, sometimes the dark blues as well, the solvent tends to lighten those dark colors just a little bit. Even though you've added up a lot of layers to try and make them dark, once you blend them with the solvent, it is going to lighten it a bit. So don't make the mistake of not doing anything about that. You need to add some final layers of colored pencil down on the paper. You can't just leave solvent as the last layer for your dark colors. And the best way to go about adding that final layer is to use a very dull pencil. Because you already have a buildup of a lot of layers to the point of having it nice and dark, anything that you add over the top should be pretty easy to draw on top of and not have it look super grainy. Although using a dull pencil is definitely going to be the best approach for it in trying to make sure there's no harsh pencil strokes. Now, I personally think that drawing whiskers or little tiny white hairs on my drawings is really a pain in the butt. I mean, to draw them, you have to draw so intricately and precisely and try and get the perfect curvature as well as correct placement of whatever color you're adding around it, or else your whiskers are going to look really scraggly. So really the best way you can help yourself out with having this problem is to use an embossing tool. You just hold the embossing tool like you would a pen or a pencil, and then you draw on the paper while adding a lot of pressure to create an indentation in the shape of a hair. Then when you draw over the top of it later with colored pencil, that part that got indented stays white. This makes it so much easier to be able to accidentally go off into areas where you have whiskers with whatever color you're trying to fill in, and then you don't have to worry about trying to fix it later and running into the problem of not being able to get your whites white with colored pencil, which is an avid problem when you're working with colored pencils because you can't draw white over darks and have it look as white as the white paper would. So you have to be really careful with your colored pencils anyways in everything that you draw. You have to try and preserve the white of your paper by drawing around things and being really intricate with how you're doing all of your drawing. Now, it's not a save all with all whiskers. Depending on how much pressure you apply, you may not apply enough pressure to get it deep enough to get a good result. And then sometimes you will get colored pencil in there, but majority of it will stay clean. Trying to draw fur with colored pencils is pretty hard. There's already a lot that goes into colored pencils, building all those layers, knowing which colors to mix, which colors that you mix together are going to equal what when you actually get it on your drawing. And then there's adding in drawing all of that fur. And you have to draw multiple layers of it over each other to get the right color. Well, that is why this little beauty, this sleek little beauty, is such a godsend tool when it comes to drawing with colored pencils. This is a slice tool, and if you don't have one, you should definitely get yourself one. They aren't too expensive. I believe this one cost me about $10 on Amazon. I'll have it linked down in the description as well as everything else on this video. But this tool makes it so handy to be able to draw proper fur, because oftentimes we'll be building up all of our layers, trying to draw so intricately between all of the sections of the fur, trying to build up those individual hairs that need to be lighter than what we're actually drawing onto the paper. Well, you can do all of that, and then you end up with spots that you ended up going off into areas that you needed to be lighter, or have some of those little individual hairs kind of hanging down through. The slice tool allows you to be able to make all of those minute mistakes with drawing your fur, and then all you have to do afterwards, once you've got all of your layers built up for all of your midtones and shadows, is just take that slice tool and scrape off that top layer to reveal some hair-like details. Absolutely amazing. And this particular model that I have has a rounded tip. This is like the perfect tip for trying to make fur details, because you can actually change the direction of doing it too, so you can get some strokes that are a little bit thinner, you can get some that are more broad, and then also it's great for turning it sideways and scraping as well to kind of create a more broad and less is actually scraped off the paper to create really subtle kind of blunt fur effects. And another great thing about it too is that I actually use it to erase my mistakes. Now, it's not an eraser, so I'm not technically erasing, but I will oftentimes scrape off that top layer to get rid of whatever mistake I made. I use my slice tool in a lot of my drawings, which I teach real-time video drawing lesson tutorials, where you can learn how to use a slice tool for different types of fur or hair, and many other tools and techniques with colored pencil drawing. The tutorials are step-by-step guided, so you can easily follow along and take your drawing skills to the next level. There are tutorials for beginners and any skill level. Learn more about the tutorials and sign up at patreon.com/Jessica Matheny. A link is right here on the screen. Or you can learn more about drawing fur with colored pencils from this video here, where I talk about some of the techniques to drawing realistic fur. I'll see you in the next video.